Okay, it's April 1st, and we're starting plants here. We have garlic sprouting. We have the grapes growing leaves over here in the window, and rhubarb growing. And I see the onions are going good. There's something else going on over there, plus some onions, and I don't know, there's a bunch of stuff growing there. And I know the green grass is starting to sprout through the dead grass, and we have a lot of animals that are getting ready to have babies here in the spring. Uh, and you know, the Bible has a lot of references to farming and gardening. And unfortunately, I think we're under 2% of Americans farm, or our food is produced by less than 2% of Americans. And that's horrible because we've left the earth. And right from the beginning, God commanded that we should till the ground, and it's for our sake. There's weeds and thorns and thistles are there for our sake, so that we can remember the Lord in the day of visitation. So there's going to be a couple terms in Revelation chapter 14 that are farming terms they're very important, I think, and I believe, and that tie in with Old Testament and some of the teachings that are missing because we don't understand farming and gardening. The Bible says, right, one man plants, another waters, God gives the increase, and then another harvests, talking about salvation of souls. So often we think we can just put the seed in, it grows, and we can harvest a tomato, and all in the same sentence. And that's not how God works. The example is that the soil has to be prepared, and then you put the proper seed in, and then you water that seed, and you tend the ground, and then a plant comes up and it brings forth fruit that's tied to salvation, and it's all through the scripture. So Revelation chapter 14, verse 1. And I looked, and lo, a Lamb stood on the Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written in their foreheads. So we saw these same, right, in Revelation chapter 7, the 144,000 sealed by the Father, 12,000 men from each tribe, from the 12 tribes. Right? How is all Israel going to be saved? Today, that country, I think, is over 96% medicated with present medicines. And I heard a voice from heaven as the voice of many waters and as the voice of a great thunder. And I heard the voice of harpers harping with their harps. And they sung, as it were, a new song before the throne and before the four beasts and the elders. And no man could learn that song but the 144,000 which were redeemed from the earth. So these are men that are going to be redeemed from the earth. Why do I say it's men? We're going to see it in the next verse. These are they which were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are they which follow the Lamb whithersoever he goeth. These were redeemed from among men, right? From the earth and from among men, being the first fruits unto God and to the Lamb. Okay, so let's look at the next verse. And in their mouth was found no guile, for they are without fault before the throne of God. So they're without fault, they're virgin men, and they're redeemed from the earth. So the first fruits, so to understand gardening, when you plant anything, I'll use tomatoes as an example, and you plant a tomato plant and it's growing out, and it gets flowers, you get excited, and you see the green tomatoes, and eventually one day you're going to go out on that plant, you may have 20 tomatoes going on that plant, and you'll get this red tomato, right? It'll be that first red tomato. It's not always going to be the sweetest, it's not always going to be the biggest, it's always not going to be certain things, but it's your first fruits, right? It's the first one that's come ripe. And it's always a treat to a farmer to go out there and get that first tomato, or to eat that first raspberry, or to eat that first ripe apple, or the different first fruits out there. It's just a treat to know what's coming, right? That that there's a harvest coming, and that's the next phase of gardening. So you have your first fruits, and that's just the beginning. And if you look in the Old Testament, you can go through and look up first fruits and do a study on that. And there were certain parts of the first fruits that were of the Lord, and certain that you were allowed to consume. And it wasn't all for the Lord. Not all the first fruits were of the Lord, but there was the wave offering and the bread offering and different offerings. but some of it you were meant to enjoy. And it was meant to be a pleasant thing to the person growing. So the first fruits are that first beginning harvest. Like if you're doing potatoes, you can go out into your potato crop and you can go in, you can steal little new potatoes, right? You get these little new potatoes down there, and you go through and you get enough potatoes for the whole family to have a meal of first fruits of potatoes. So we see that these men are first fruits, and we're going to see at the end of this chapter, we're going to see the word harvest used, right? So the harvest and the sickle, and so with first fruits, there's not any major tools needed. It's usually you just go out there with your hands and you can just pick those that are needed. But when it comes time for harvest in the Old Testament, right, is you would use a scythe or you would use bigger equipment, and it was laborious, the harvest, right? It was big. That was your main crop. And then one word that's missing in Revelation chapter 14, which I think is very interesting, and I'm still praying about it, because you don't see it anywhere from the rest of the book, is gleanings. And, the word only appears a few times in the Bible, but it was a very important principle. And I want to just look at that real quick. Let's just go back to your Old Testament, right, and just look at Leviticus. And again, I know it's the law, but the law was given as a schoolmaster so that we can learn Christ. Right? A lot of people just say, oh, that's the law, we don't need to study it. But the law is important. The law is there to be a schoolmaster so that you can learn more of Christ. And we're seeing that here in Revelation chapter 14. But in Leviticus 19:9, and when you reap the harvest of your land, thou shalt not wholly reap the corners of thy field, neither shalt thou gather the gleanings of thy harvest. And thou shalt not glean the vineyard, neither shalt thou gather every grape of thy vineyard. Thou shalt leave them for the poor and stranger. I am the Lord your God. So this is God's welfare system. We know that, when you read later on, that Ruth and Naomi take advantage of this provision that God has done for his people. The gleanings was always for the poor and the stranger walking through the land, that someone could go by and get the corners of your field. And you were obligated to leave the corners of your field. You were not allowed. It was sinful. It was an abomination, it says, to glean those corners, right? That's the welfare. That is that, in coming days, there may come a time where people are going to be looking for food. It's the gleanings that they get. It's the gleanings. That has always been God's welfare system for the poor, because there's always poor and there's always strangers in the land. People that are down and out and may need a little bit of food. Well, God has provided for them, and that's the gleaning. So if you're gardening and farming and preparing for the days that may be ahead, understand that the gleanings are for the Lord. The gleanings are there so that he can take care of the poor and needy. And I'm just throwing that out there. But the first fruits you were allowed to enjoy. And tithing in the Old Testament came out of the harvest. So the first fruits you were allowed to enjoy, certain part had to go to the temple, but you were allowed to enjoy some of it. The harvest, you had to give 10% of the harvest, right? And the best of what you had. And then the gleanings were for the Lord. You just had to leave corners. And there's no set amount. Whatever a man purposes in his heart to leave for the corners or the apples or the grapes. You weren't, if you dropped a bunch of grapes, you weren't supposed to go back and pick them up. Again, that's all of God's provisions are there to take care of both the rich, the middle, and the poor. So we do know that these men, these virgin men, are preserved before God. One other thing that's important, especially with what's going on today, and I think I have to cover it, and I haven't wanted to cover it, is I want to go back to Genesis chapter 6. Genesis chapter 6. We're going to read the first 6 verses. Because it's important to understand what's going on today in the world. There are studies showing that if you receive certain medicines, you're being altered. My wife plants corn that I'm going to use tomatoes. And she's had seed for over 20 years, and she keeps replanting that seed. It's an heirloom seed. She's got mortgage lifters and San Marzanos and Rutgers, or these different tomatoes. And she plants them, and she's very meticulous on where she plants things, when she plants things. I think last year she was hand pollinating corn so that she could get the corn because it will cross-pollinate. And so let's say my neighbor down at the bottom of the hill decides to go into business with Monsanto, and they're planting corn and tomatoes, and they're planting Monsanto's genetically modified tomatoes. That's what it is, genetically modified, meaning they took a regular corn and they modified the DNA of the corn or the tomato to produce certain things, normally to be sterile, and to reproduce after certain traits and to be able to receive certain chemicals easier. Usually it's pesticides. So they're modified. Their DNA of the corn and of the tomatoes are modified so that they can receive Roundup, pesticides. So they're growing their stuff down there at the bottom of the hill, and my wife's got hers there, and we have our bees, and our bees they don't see borders, and they just see corn. And they go down there, and they go down to the neighbor's corn and tomatoes, and bee A or B picks up the corn, another one picks up the tomatoes, and they come up and they see that our plants need pollinating, and so they pollinate our tomatoes and corn. And all of a sudden, our corn and tomato have been altered forever. The corn seed is altered. It's now a genetically modified organism. It's not organic. Won't reproduce. It's been corrupted. Same with the tomato. Right? They're both, you can't do anything with them. They've been altered. The flesh of those plants has been altered. On top of that, that company, Monsanto, which was bought out by Bayer, can now come and take my whole crop because they're going to say that's their corn and tomatoes because I've stolen their patented product. If you don't believe me, go look up how many farms Monsanto has taken around the world. India, farmers have committed suicide en masse. They didn't understand the contracts they were signing because the genetic makeup and the courts have ruled that if you change the DNA of the product, then you can own the product. Let me say that again. If you change the original DNA of the product, you alter the DNA, you can own that corn. That's why Monsanto names it, and they own it. That is an owned corn. You have to buy it from them. If you're altered and your DNA is altered, go look up the Sweden study to show that human DNA is being altered by receiving certain medicines. There's no difference. The Supreme Court has ruled that your flesh is no longer yours. There's a patent. You have patent in you now. You have a patented product, just like my tomatoes and corn would have Monsanto's patents in them. And I have to throw them out. They're corrupt. These 144,000 have to be pure. Let's see if that's happened before. Genesis chapter 6. Let's look at these first 6 verses. Nothing new under the sun. This is what the devil does. God almost had to wipe everyone out, but there was one man that resisted the genetically modified organisms. And it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants in the earth in those days. And also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. Something going on here that ought not to be going on. There is a cross-contamination happening that displeases God to the point that he's going to destroy the earth amongst the flesh of men. Five, and God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. At this point, where men and women were altering who they were and what God had for them. They were choosing to do things outside of the will of God, to the point of God calls it wicked. Verse 7, and the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, for it repented me that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Well, why did Noah find grace in the eyes of the Lord? Let's find out. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. Meaning Noah, from Adam and Eve to Noah, he was perfect in his generations, meaning none of this wickedness that was happening on the earth had gotten into the line of Noah. Right? Because out of Shem, his son, comes a line of Christ. And if Satan, this is Satan's working up here. The sons of men and giants and daughters, the sons of God and the daughters of men and the giants. This is of Satan. This is wickedness. To the point where God's going to destroy the whole earth, everything that breathes. But he saw that Noah, one man, his generation was perfect. Not that he was a perfect man. It says he was a just man. And he walked with God, but his generation, from Adam to Noah, his line, his seed was perfect. If not, then Christ would have been contaminated. There would have been no line pure for Christ to come to this earth on that Satan hadn't corrupted. There's a lot of interesting things in the line of Christ, and it shows the power and mercy of God. But corruption from Satan and contamination of the bloodline and a DNA that's been altered was one of the things that was not there. Let's go back to Revelation chapter 14. I am glad God is sovereign, that he is able. I don't know how. How is he able to find 144,000 virgin men that are not contaminated? I don't want to hear anything about, oh, God can fix it all. That's just like praying over a Big Mac and saying God's going to bless that. If you believe that, then you shouldn't be watching these videos, because he's not in that. I don't even know what that is. Ask not for what's in the shambles. You ought not to be eating it. You know you ought not to be. The government just came out and said everything that it's wrapped in is poisonous and is killing you. Everything about it is death. Revelation chapter 14. So we have the first fruits. The 144,000 are first fruits. And then in verse 6, he goes on. And I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation and kindred and tongue and people, saying with a loud voice, fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him that made heaven and earth and the sea and the fountains of waters. So the hour of his judgment has come. This is talking about the wrath of God, which we are going to see at the end of this chapter. And then 15 and 16, those two chapters are dealing with the vials, the 7 vials that are poured out upon the earth, which is the wrath of God, which is what, as believers, we are saved from. We are saved from the wrath to come. The wrath hasn't come yet at this point in Revelation. Verse 8, and there followed another angel saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. And we're going to see the fall of Babylon over in chapter, was it 9? No, it's 18, right? 18. Chapter 18. We're going to see the fall of Babylon. So these are things that John is seeing. Remember, this is still in the context of the 7th trumpet. This is the 6th seal has happened. So we're in that period of time from the 6th to the 7th, beginning of the 7th year. Doesn't say that it falls then. It could have fallen before then. But we do that this angel is bringing that up to remembrance. Verse 9. And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, if any man worship the beast in his image and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation, and he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascendeth up forever and ever. And they have no rest, day or nor night, who worship the beast in his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name. So there we saw that at the halfway point, right? 3.5 years in. So that's another 2 years from now. The Antichrist is going to be wounded in the head. His deadly wound is going to be healed. The whole world's going to worship. And he's going to cause both small and great to receive a mark. We know that's about the halfway point. And we know that's going to be the case because that's around that'll happen during the 4th seal, which is the pale horse, death, and hell. The 5th seal is the martyrs that we see. So we know that in mass believers, starting in that 5th year, so it'll start in the 4th year during that 4th seal, where people are going to be causing to take the mark, and that's when family's going to turn against family. And then there's going to be a mass martyrdom of believers starting when that 5th seal opens. And then the 6th seal opens, which corresponds with the 7th trumpet. And the 7th trumpet is where we go up, the last trump. But this is also tied in with that, right? The 7th seal hasn't been opened, which is the wrath of God. Just keep that in memory, right? The 7th seal goes with the 7 vials. It's the last year, plus or minus, which is the wrath of God, which is the end of the tribulation. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. And I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, Write, blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth, from this point forward. Yea, saith the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works do follow them. Remember at the beginning of this lesson, I talked about the gleanings and the harvest. Talked about the first fruits and the harvest. So we saw the 144,000 as part of the first fruits. We're going to see the harvest soon. There is a group of people right here in verse 13 that I believe the Bible is teaching is the gleanings. Just take a look at it. I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, Write, blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth, from this point forward. Yea, saith the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works do follow them. And I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and upon the cloud one sat like unto the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and his hand a sharp sickle. So this is Christ sitting on the cloud, with his crown, with a sharp sickle. And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him that sat on the cloud, thrust in thy sickle and reap, for the time is come for thee to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. It's now time to harvest the believers. This is tied in again. We haven't gone on to the seventh seal and the wrath of God. This is still tied in back to chapter 11. This is still tied in with the seventh trumpet. This is the completion of it. This is the culmination of 11, 13, 14, and now 14. This is the harvest of the believers. For the harvest of the earth is ripe. And he that sat on the cloud thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. And another angel came out of the temple which is in heaven, he also having a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar, which had power over fire, and cried with a loud cry to him that had the sharp sickle, saying, thrust in thy sharp sickle, and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. Now I just want you to look at this, verse 18, because this ties into the seventh seal. Another angel came out from the altar, which had power over fire. Now let's go back and see if we saw that. Chapter 8 of Revelation, verses 3 through 5. And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer, and there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense which came with the prayers of the saints ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. And the angel took the censer and filled it with fire on the altar and cast it into the earth. And there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake. Let's go back to Revelation chapter 14. Verse 18, another angel came out from the altar, same place, same time period. This is going to be the opening. This is the opening of the seventh seal in Revelation chapter 8. We're now going into the wrath of God. The earth was just reaped. The seventh seals open in chapter 8, verse 5. We see him filling his censer with fire. This angel came out from the altar, which had power over fire, and cried with a loud voice that had the sharp sickle, saying, thrust in thy sharp sickle and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. A second harvest. This is of the wicked. And the angel thrust in his sickle into the earth and gathered the vine of the earth and cast it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden without the city, and blood came out of the winepress, even unto the horse's bridle, by the space of 1,600 furlongs. Chapter 15, verse 1. And I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, 7 angels having the 7 last plagues, for in them is filled up the wrath of God. Revelation chapter 6, verse 17, for the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand? So now we're going to go on in the next couple videos, we're going to look at the wrath of God. This is a very interesting chapter because you have 2 of the 3 clearly spelled out of gardening. You see the first fruits, which is the 144,000 pure men, virgin men. Why do you need that? Because if you're going to start a new civilization, if all Israel is going to be saved, you need a pretty good base. And you want that seed not to be corrupted, just like we read about in Noah. God is not going to use corrupt seed. The mingling and hybrid seeds, God, go look up, mingling of seeds. It's all abhorrent to God. It's vile and wicked to him, the mingling of seeds. To him, he doesn't understand it other than it's men's hearts evil continually, thinking evil continually, right? It's just to him. And then once you start messing with the genetics of mankind, God is ready to two things: the days of Noah and the days of Lot. If you don't see those two things going on right now in the world, you're mad. There's no hope for you if you don't see those two things going. If you don't see what's going on in Lot's time and go and study that out, and if you don't see what's going on in Noah's time, which we just read in chapter 6, if you don't see those two things, folks, you got to wake up. The night is at hand. The day is far spent. The wrath of God is going to be wicked. But we saw the first fruits with the 144,000, and we see the harvest. Where are the gleanings? Is that hinted at in verse 13? Are there people that are left, the corners? God always has a remnant. You see what I'm saying? Is there a group of people going through the wrath of God? Is there a remnant? Are there corners left? God wouldn't violate his law. God always leaves a remnant for the poor and the stranger. If I'm wrong, go ahead and send a comment and say, Sean, you're wrong. But I understand first fruits. I understand a harvest. And I understand gleanings. And it's not mentioned there, but it seems to be hinted there, potentially. Jesus said, no sign shall be given. Jonas the prophet. You know, back in February of 2019, off the coast of South Africa, there was a guy filming fish or sardines, and he was swallowed by a humpback whale. And then in June of 2021, off the coast of Cape Cod, there was a guy lobstering and was swallowed by a whale. It was in their mouth. They were humpback whales. Am I looking for signs? I don't know. Those are very unique. The one in South Africa in 2019 was caught on video. That's the sign of Jonah the prophet. In the days of Noah and Lot, when all flesh had corrupted itself, but Noah was perfect in his generations. He was perfect in his generations. His flesh was not owned by the devil. That was what was happening was wicked. Wasn't of God. God told him not to do that. You choose your own kind, and you stay with your own kind. And that goes for the angels, the created beings, the cherubims and the seraphims, and the man and be, you reproduce after your own kind. It's an abomination all through the scripture to mingle the seed. Hopefully that was a help. I'm sorry it took a couple days. Hopefully it was a blessing. If you're not saved, you need to get born again. You need to trust Christ. The days are getting short. If you are born again, you need to get busy. You need to prepare your family and your house. You need to prepare your spirit and soul. You need to get together with your spouse and work this out. If you don't have a spouse, then you just need to have a game plan with God and what he expects you to do in these troubled times. It's not about us. Like I've said, it's just easier to go to the FEMA camp and have your head chopped off. That's the easy out. It really is. I'm not against it. But if you want to endure to the end and receive that blessing, then you have to make certain steps and preparations like Noah did for the flood that's coming, because Satan's going to make war with the saints and he is going to prevail. So that's what we have. And until the next time, take care.